Implied warranties are a little bit tricky because the nature of an implied warranty is it's essentially a contract term that the law will read into the contract. And generally, we're talking about the common law reading some term into a contract, even though it may not be expressly stated. And so that's what we're going to focus on here. In the context of a construction project, if we take the owner and the contractor, for example, both sides make certain implied warranties just by virtue of the common law in those jurisdictions. And so these, like all other kinds of warranties, they can be disclaimed, they can be limited, etc. But if the parties don't say anything one way or the other, then the common law will read these warranties in. So, for example, contractors, and these are Michigan cases that I've cited here, but contractors make an implied warranty that they will perform the work in a workmanlike manner. Okay, not do sloppy or shoddy work. And that's going to be true if you have a handshake agreement with a contractor to renovate your bathroom, for example. There's an implied warranty there under the Vulcan Industries case that to the effect that the contractor will perform the work in a workmanlike manner. You don't have a written contract, so there's not an express warranty in that way. You may not have discussed it in any particular fashion with the contractor in reaching your handshake agreement. Nevertheless, the law will read in this implied warranty of workmanlike performance. Now, like, as I say, all warranties, implied warranties, these can be limited, they can be expanded if you have a written contract and you want to make sure that the contractor is performing not just average, but first rate, best in class, whatever. You can craft language around a warranty about the contractor's performance, or even better, you can have specific metrics if it's a measurable outcome. For example, a power plant producing X amount of electricity in a certain amount of in a certain time period and generating less than Y amount of emissions, things like that. You can have performance guarantees. That's at the other extreme from the bathroom reno. So these are default terms that the law will read in the absence of the parties having said anything one way or the other about the quality of the contractor's performance. In the context of residential construction, as to new homes, there's an implied warranty of habitability, which is kind of a variation on the same theme, right? That the structure will end up being habitable. There's not rain coming through the roof, etc. Now, on the flip side, the owner also makes certain implied warranties. For example, that the plans and specifications the owner provides, right, and this is presupposing a design, bid, build, project delivery method, but that the plans and specifications the owner provides will actually be adequate to construct the building as intended. This, the Walter Toby case, that is a Michigan case again, that essentially adopts what was established at the federal level for federal construction projects in the Spearn Doctrine back at the beginning of the 20th century. And most states have adopted some version of the Spearn Doctrine that says, okay, the owner has an implied gives an implied warranty to the contractor that the plans and specifications are adequate to the task. There's also an implied warranty running from the owner that the information that the owner's giving the contractor, the material information, is accurate. So, for example, information about subsurface conditions, things like that. There's also an implied warranty from the owner that the contractor will have access to the site, right? Because it's building on the owner's property or property that the owner has some right to restrict access to. And this comes into play when Typically there's a fight between the owner and the contractor, and the owner locks out the contractor, for example. Depending on whether the owner was rightful in locking out the contractor, the owner might or might not be in breach of the implied warranty of access. Or, for example, if one contractor is performing a certain scope of work and another contractor is performing a different scope of work, and the second contractor's work follows on from the first contractor, if the second contractor has committed forces and materials and so forth on the assumption that it was going to have access to the site on day one, and it's delayed because the first contractor hasn't finished its work yet because it's behind, the second contractor may have a claim against the owner for breach of the implied warranty of access to the site because the second contractor can't get in there and do its work. This is a situation where both contractors have direct contracts with the owner. So again, like all implied warranties, these can be expanded, they can be narrowed, they can be disclaimed, etc. to a point in the contract documents themselves, but in default of any contract language addressing these things, these kinds of implied warranties will be read into the party's contract. Then finally, you may remember from first-year contracts or sales class that there are certain implied warranties under the Uniform Commercial Code. Now this is going to apply to the materials that are supplied to the project, lumber, steel, things like that, goods under the contract. So at this point, we're looking at the relationship between suppliers and typically subcontractors who are purchasing the materials. Although sometimes the general contractor may purchase some materials, the owner may purchase materials that the owner has somebody else install. So it's important to understand that while the UCC doesn't apply to construction contracts in general, that is the contract for performance of the work, the A101, for example, the UCC is not going to apply to that. That doesn't mean you can forget about the UCC altogether, because there will be, in the context of all the things that are happening on a construction project, there will be at some point sales of goods. And so those UCC warranties can come back into play at that level, depending on who's purchasing the goods and what the context is for the sale, and who's making a claim for breach of the implied warranty. But the two main implied warranties under the Uniform Commercial Code, Article 2, are merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. And one way to think about this is merchantability is essentially a warranty that the goods will be fit for their ordinary purpose, right? That a hammer is going to be adequate to drive nails, things like that, as opposed to fitness for a particular purpose, which is a situation where the seller of the goods has provided guidance to the buyer about which goods to select, right? The buyer is relying on the seller's skill and judgment to furnish suitable goods. Seller understands that. The seller furnishes, for example, a certain type of roof sealant because the application that is contemplated by the architect's plans and specifications make the particular roof sealant that the supplier is supplying the best for that application, the best for that use. In that situation where the buyer could be the owner, could be a supplier, could be a subcontractor, but whoever the buyer is relying on the, say, manufacturer's representative to select a suitable roof sealant for this particular application, there might well be an implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose in that fact pattern, because the manufacturer's rep is making the suggestion for roof sealant number 1 rather than roof sealant number 2, given the application that's intended. So, in thinking about implied warranties, one can't forget the possibility of an implied warranty into the Uniform Commercial Code for the goods that are being supplied to the project. Now, who can take advantage of those becomes a question of privity, for one, and that's another issue under Article 2 of the UCC. And it also becomes a question of, depending on the nature of the claim, are we going to look to UCC type warranties? Are we going to look to common law warranties, or the language of the contract, depending on, again, who's making the claim? The point here is just to understand that there may well be UCC warranties that can be relevant when there's a problem, when there's some sort of defect in the construction. So implied warranties operate in the background as default terms that the law will supply in the absence of the parties agreeing on any of these concepts or any of these areas of risk allocation. Some of these, such as the implied warranty of workmanlike performance or the implied warranty of adequacy of the design, may be read in by virtue of the common law. Others, like the UCC warranties, are statutory warranties that are implied into the parties' agreements. But it's important to understand that the context for construction contracts includes these different implied warranties, and understanding whether they've been addressed at all, and if so, how, is an important part of understanding the text of any construction contract, even if it's just a handshake kind of agreement. It's important to understand that there are these implied warranties operating in the background.